Alive and Well STL is a presentation of the St. Louis Regional Health Commission and RareGem Productions to build a healthier St. Louis. Power up with the positive. Learn more at oneraregem.com. That's ONERAREGEM.com.
Support for Alive and Well STL comes from Beyond Housing, helps entire communities become better places to live. Learn more at beyondhousing.org.
The Regional Health Commission works in partnership with regional health sector advocates and stakeholders to improve healthcare access, reduce health disparities, and improve health outcomes for the uninsured and the underinsured in St. Louis City and County.
Alive and Well STL with Bethany Johnson-Javois, CEO of the St. Louis Integrated Health Network.
Today we're going to be talking about trauma, trying to define it, trying to think it through and make it practical for our audience, because it does happen in our community, and the effects we need to talk about how to address.
The reality is, I believe that we have pockets in our community that have, in effect, normalized what, in fact, are really traumatic experiences. And we see that as a way of coping with trauma, and it's one of the things that we see quite often. But I think that there's a great deal of prevalence in terms of poverty and violence, and there's pockets of our community that are experiencing these each and every day.
Often, it is the underlying trauma, the thing we don't want to talk about, or the things that we're afraid to face that prevent us from achieving good health. We thought it was important to re-air this conversation for you, to encourage all of you to get involved. We'll be right back.
RareGem Productions, proudly presenting, promoting, and producing positive programs. What does it mean to you to be alive and well in St. Louis? We want to hear your story. Tell us what it means to you personally, what you need to achieve it, how our program may have helped, or even some of your best recommendations for the rest of us. You can share it on the message box at 314-333-8369. You can send an email to info@oneraregem.com. You can even post it on Facebook at ONERGP or on the Hallelujah 1600 page as well. We'll share your message with our community to help make it possible for everyone to thrive. It's great to be alive. Be alive and well, STL. 10 a.m. Mondays on Hallelujah 1600. RareGem Productions proudly presenting the positive. Alive and Well, STL.
Last week, we talked with Rosetta Keaton of the Regional Health Commission and Joe Yancey of Places for People. They shared with us their thoughts about how communities and individuals can become alive and well. They gave us tips about how, through supporting one another, by believing in something bigger than ourselves, among other things, we could be well on the path to becoming alive and well. Oftentimes, we as individuals are hindered from thriving by the difficult or traumatic experiences of our lives. It can be true that we experience something traumatic only one time, but often there are persistent negative issues in our lives that happen time after time after time that can impact our emotional and physical well-being. We know from research that we who have experienced persistent stress, or people who have had multiple traumatic events happen to them, are far more likely to turn to the bottle or a pill or another substance to find a way of escape. Persistent stress and experiencing events that shock us to our core can also lead to depression and disease, such as heart disease and diabetes. Often, it is the underlying trauma, the thing we don't want to talk about, or the things that we're afraid to face that prevent us from achieving good health. In our last season of the show, Joe Yancey, who you heard from last week, and Suzanne LeLaurin from the International Institute introduced this concept to us and inspired us to continue this show, focusing on how we address the toxic stress many in our community experience and use this new level of recognition of the impact of trauma or toxic stress as a way to get to alive and well in St. Louis. We thought it was important to re-air this conversation for you, to encourage all of you to get involved. Go to aliveandwellstl.com to learn how to join the conversation. There's an important community event on September 30th at 4 p.m. at Il Monastero at 3050 Olive Street. More information is available on aliveandwellstl.com. Today in studio, I'm excited to be speaking with Suzanne LeLaurin, Senior Vice President from Programs at the International Institute of St. Louis, and Joe Yancey, Executive Director of Places for People, who both serve on advisory boards for the St. Louis Regional Health Commission. Thank you both for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Bethany.
The topic is trauma. Please, one of you, give me a definition of trauma. What does that mean?
Well, I believe that trauma is experiencing or witnessing an event that really compromises and negatively impacts one's sense of safety and well-being and security.
And I would agree. I think it is both experiencing it, so we tend to think of trauma in a physical sense. We think of it as somebody hitting you or being shot or some sort of physical assault, but it also can be emotional. I think that someone who is repeatedly verbally abused is experiencing trauma. But then also, as Joe says, it's not just what happens to us, but it's also what we see. And so if we witness those kinds of things, that can be very traumatic, can be very painful, not just for the body, but for, as you say, the spirit, for the mind.
So can you give us some practical examples of how we might recognize an individual or a community that has experienced this type of trauma? What would we be seeing? How can we recognize that?
Well, I think it's very difficult, and I think that's one of the problems, Bethany, to be honest with you, in terms of really being able to recognize trauma. The reality is, I believe that we have pockets in our community that have, in effect, normalized what, in fact, are really traumatic experiences. And we see that as a way of coping with trauma, and it's one of the things that we see quite often. But I think that there's a great deal of prevalence in terms of poverty and violence, and there's pockets of our community that are experiencing these each and every day.
Yeah, I think the experts will tell you that there are symptoms within individuals that can extend into communities that are indicators of trauma. I mean, not being able to sleep well or wanting to sleep all the time, not being able to function in terms of daily stresses without getting angry or depressed. There are a whole slew of sort of symptoms that mental health experts identify with trauma. But the interesting thing about all of those is sometimes those are coping mechanisms, and they are often sort of a normal response to something that's very abnormal that's happened to people. We all have the experience. If something's bugging us, something we're upset about something, it's going over and over and over in our head, and we're getting more and more anxious. But the moment we start saying it out loud, it's less stressful for us. There's something about, and actually there is neuroscience, there's something about taking an emotion and putting it into words that decreases the pain of that emotion. And so just talking, and that means for those of us who are listening, to listen and to create the space and allow people to tell their stories. We have to give them permission to do that.
What are some of the type of questions, if I'm a listener wanting to be sensitive to not re-traumatize someone who has a safe space with me to talk to me, what kind of questions am I asking to try to help to pull that story out and to have that conversation happen?
Well, I think as Suzanne kind of suggested, I think the real power there is in the human interaction, and I don't think there's any magic bullet questions that you can ask. Bethany, I think what it is about is really having that conversation, just talking to people, getting to know people. If you see some of the signs that we're talking about, where one is kind of numb or one has reactions to things like loud noises or those kinds of things, just have that conversation. Start to just talk to people, get to know people. I don't think you want to lead with, tell me what's happened in your life that's causing you these problems necessarily, but just having the conversation as we would with anybody else. I think the human interaction is the power there.
I think it's right. It's not about the specific question you ask. It is about your being authentic in your care and your love for that other person, and that this is a safe place. And that, the worst thing in the world that you can do is if somebody starts telling you something horrible or, about some trauma in their lives, the worst thing that you can do is say, oh, I don't want to hear about that. Or, oh, that couldn't possibly have happened. One of the things that we've trained teachers to do with kids when they tell a terrible story or they're really acting out, there's sort of just a few key messages that they need to give to those kids. What happened to you is horrible, okay? And when you say that, it's not just that you're showing concern, but you're telling them you believe them, which is very powerful. And you don't say, okay, everything's fine now, because it isn't. But you do say, your life will get better. And so you're offering out some hope too. You ask what you can do for them. And I think many times we think that what people are going to ask of us is something, beyond the scope of what we can do. But many times, it's little things. Give me a hug. Can I come back and talk to you if I get stressed? We do have to be careful for people with severe mental illness or severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress that you do want to get them into the care of someone who's a professional. I tell my staff all the time, we only have one therapist on staff. We do have several social workers. I say every interaction, every single one of you have with our clients can be therapeutic, can be caring. You can show compassion. You don't have to be a therapist to do that.
So the one thing that I'm learning as well is you look beyond the symptom. So the alcoholism, the smell, the view, how people are put together is a symptom of something bigger, where typically we can kind of look at that as the problem. That's really a symptom of asking the question, what happened, in the right space and place and time, in the right way.
Well, in fact, I remember it was a social worker whose expertise is in addictions. And he said, I've been working in addictions for 15 years. And he says, I have yet to have a client who doesn't have an underlying mental health issue. And he said, now I don't even deal with the addiction. I deal with the depression. I deal with the trauma. I deal with the anxiety. And if we can work on that, the addiction takes care of itself. So you're right. There are these outward symptoms of pain that people are experiencing, and we have to get beyond that and not just judge.
And I think really the key then is around education. The topic, frankly, that we're talking about today is a little discussed topic in the healthcare arena. It is missing in action in many cases. And so, that child that's acting out in school, the first thing is there's some kind of conduct disorder, there's this, and there may be, but more than likely underlying all of that is experiences that child has had that are causing him to act out or her to act out. That, in a way, is a way of defending themselves. That is a way of protecting themselves. The destination about all of this is safety. Safety is the destination. Safety is a space that we want and need to help people get to. And how we do that, we can do that in any number of ways, and Suzanne has talked about many of them. But that is the destination, because that's what's missing.
So, Joe, do something for me. Speak into the mic to the audience with the call of action to our leaders, to providers, to our families, parents, those that have a position of authority. This is more than just a suggestion. It feels like we really do need to step up. What is the call to action for us?
I believe that the call to action is that we, as a community, need to start having these discussions. We need to start having forums and discussions and talking about this hidden issue that is, I think, affecting negatively not only emotional health, but physical health. And we do see it played out in physical health over time. So from my perspective, that call to action is we need to have those community leaders, faith leaders, start to set up forums where we can start to have these discussions and start to talk about and bring about what would it look like to have a real trauma-informed community here in St. Louis.
So in wrapping up, is there anything else that you want to share with us that we need to know? It's a very important show, and I can feel the sense of urgency from what you're sharing.
I've got one thing I'd like to share, and this is not only a call to action, it's something people can do right now. We are doing on Wednesday evenings at 5 o'clock in the evening at the Demetrius Johnson Foundation, which is at 740 North Union, a Seeking Safety group. And this started, Bethany, real quickly after a collaboration with the St. Louis Police Department and the Demetrius Johnson Foundation, Hopewell Center and Places for People. And the idea is to address the trauma of families in our community who have lost a loved one to homicide violence, to homicide, and to address the hurt that these families are having. And so I'm kind of putting a call out there to anybody who has experienced that kind of thing. 5 o'clock Wednesday evening at the Demetrius Johnson Foundation, 740 North Union.
I have two calls to action. One is to the medical community, and one is to all of us. First of all, the medical community absolutely has to incorporate in their encounters with patients a method of eliciting stories. And I realize with the pressures they have on seeing a certain number of patients in a certain time period, they tend to focus on symptoms. But as Joe pointed out, a lot of physical symptoms come from the experience of trauma. And there are tools out there. Bethany, you and I were talking about it before we went on the air, and I'm happy to share those. And so a call to action to the medical community is, give me a call and let's sit down and go through these particularly good tool that has been tested with primary care physicians. The other call to action is to everybody. And in addition to the issue of safety, what people lose when they've experienced a severe trauma is they've lost attachments. They've lost an ability to connect to other people. And for all of those symptoms that we see of how people cope with trauma, the abuse of substances, the anger, and so forth, it makes it hard to care for them people. And so, the message I would give to all of us is to reach out to those people and show them our love.
Wow. Anything else you got burning, Joe?
Well, I think the other thing is that what I would like to see put in place is, because again, it is so difficult to recognize, and people tend to identify other kinds of issues and miss the underlying trauma that really is driving those things, is that we institute some method for being able to screen, particularly in our school systems, because what happens is that when a child, and Bethany, whether it's, physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, witnessing violence in the home or witnessing violence on the street, or just through bullying, I think our kids are exposed, particularly in certain pockets of our communities, to inundated with traumatic kinds of experiences and events. And so at the school level, in the schools, if we were able to screen for that, and you can, then I think that would be a way of being able to help identify early on, and we're talking about early intervention at that point, which I think would be key. I'm a little hesitant, though, to put that out there because we do not have the services in place at this point.
We want to thank you both, Joe and Suzanne, for the work that you're doing and bringing this very latent issue to the surface. It is so important. We also want to ask listeners, think about what your vision is for a trauma-informed community. What does that look like? Go to the Alive and Well website. Put that out there. Let's see what we can create. Can we get some momentum? And to the faith community, pray about and think about, when you listen to what you hear today, what can you personally do? What purpose can you serve within this? Because somebody's hearing a call and they need to start moving, starting today. Thank you for listening today. We are grateful for your gift of time to this conversation. We encourage you to stay involved and get involved. Visit aliveandwellstl.com to learn more and come join our table for the conversation on September 30th at Il Monastero, 3050 Olive Street. For more information, look at aliveandwellstl.com.
Alive and Well STL. Thank you for joining us today. For resources available, go to aliveandwellstl.com. If you have more questions about the program, need help, or want to connect, please call the message box at 314-333-8369. The Regional Health Commission, with Chief Executive Officer Robert Friend Jr., committed to providing a detailed review of change over the past decade in 14 leading health indicators for the city and county of St. Louis. The first decade review of health status report, an update to building a healthier St. Louis. Discover the narrative, the data, and celebrate the progress already made to improve healthcare access and reduce health disparities in our region. Learn more at stlrhc.org. Alive and Well STL is another positive production of RareGem Productions. Thanks for listening.